Already, Gen, the hip hop historian. Today we're going to talk about the movie soundtrack era. When movie soundtracks, especially the hip hop versions, were just as good as albums. The best movie soundtrack in hip hop history is Menace to Society, hands down. Pocket Full of Stone was on there by UGK. Spice One, Trigger Got No Heart. MC8 Straight Up Menace. Too Short had a jam on there. Top of the World. I could go on and on and on. That's one of the greatest albums, period. Menace to Society soundtrack, along with my favorite movie, Menace to Society. Murder Was the Case by Death Row was an amazing soundtrack. It was a masterpiece. It had Death Row's artists outside of Snoop Doggy Dogg being displayed with some G-Funk beats. It was a classic soundtrack. Above the Rim, it had Tupac Pain. It had some Dog Pound songs. It had some classic jams on there. Above the Rim was a great movie and a soundtrack. An amazing cinema. Tupac and them did their thing. And the soundtrack, I think, was Interscope too. So it was almost Death Row-like to a certain extent. Juice. Juice was a phenomenal movie. Juice had a dope soundtrack. It had the jam by Rakim and had some other songs on there. It was a pretty classic soundtrack. Colors was another dope soundtrack and a classic movie. You know, Ice-T had the song Colors, and there was some other jams on there from the West Coast that was classic. Belly, that was an iconic movie. DMX, Nas, Hype Williams film, and the soundtrack was on point. It was definitely some bangers on there. If you remember, just pull up the track list and you would not be disappointed. Gang Related, the movie with Tupac and I forgot the other guy named Tim Belushi or something like that. Great soundtrack because it had unreleased Tupac tracks, and Tupac had died, so it was like a post album kind of, and it had some Death Row songs in there as well, and Outlaws, all of them. They had some great features on there. Baller Blocking by Cash Money was a dope movie and soundtrack. It had some unreleased tracks by Cash Money. BG had some standout tracks. It had Family Affair by UGK. That was one of my favorite UGK songs that got slept on. Baller Blocking was a dope soundtrack. No Limit had Bout It, the movie, and the soundtrack was dope too. No Limit also had I Got the Hookup. That was a good soundtrack. I Got the Hookup. The soundtrack era was an amazing era. Dirty Third by Wreck Shop Records, which had DJ Screw and some other great features in the movie. The soundtrack was dope too. Ball caps and tennis shoes. That's the hustler's attire when they're on the move. Yeah. That was by Ronnie Spencer. One of my favorite songs on there. Also The Wash by Dr. Dre and Snoop, that movie. That was a very dope soundtrack because it had that classic song by Dre and them. You know, the soundtrack era, when soundtracks meant something and it went with the movie, that was a great era. Nowadays you get a movie and the soundtrack just be thrown together, if there's a soundtrack at all. I lived in a great era of hip hop. And any soundtracks that I left off, I know E40 had one, Mac 10 had one. Jay-Z had Streets Is Watching. That was a dope soundtrack. That was my pivotal moment to recognize that Jay-Z was probably going to be a force in hip hop because the Streets Is Watching, he rapped everything he was saying lined up with the movie. It was almost like Michael Jackson Moonwalker type level. And Jay-Z also had the State Property soundtracks. Those were dope as well. So any soundtrack that I left off, let me know. And if you got a problem with it, tell them Jen said it already. Yeah.